Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So this week we are heading to Modern for a deck that I've been trying to make work for Budget Magic for a really long time, and thanks to Conspiracy 2, it is finally possible. So we are going to be playing some Modern Enchantress. As you can see, 99 bucks in the paper world, 29 ticks on Magic Online. A quick reminder before we break down the deck. If you enjoy Budget Magic and this Enchantress deck, it would be amazing of you if you could take a quick second, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. All that stuff is a great way that you can support the channel for free. Anyway, let's talk about Modern Enchantress. So, the key card of Modern Enchantress, the card that really makes the deck work, is Ghostly Prison. And Ghostly Prison was the card that made it super hard, well actually impossible to build this deck. I have tried to build this deck multiple times over the past year because I really enjoy Enchantress decks, and I think there can be a pretty sweet one in Modern on a budget, but Ghostly Prison was always a sticking point because it was like $15 a copy, so you're looking at $40, $50, $60 just for a set of Ghostly Prisons, and you really need Ghostly Prison to make the deck work. Sphere of Safety is awesome, and it's the way we finally lock creatures out of the game for good. But Ghostly Prison, when we play it on turn 2, turn 3, that's the way that we stay alive against Goblin Guides and against Blighted Agents and all these super aggressive, low mana decks that are in Modern. So you really need the Ghostly Prisons to make the deck work. Well, now that it's been reprinted in Conspiracy Take the Crown, all of a sudden, Ghostly Prison went from $50+ a playset down to $12, $15 a playset. It's a massive, massive, massive drop. So essentially, we can get the entire playset of Ghostly Prison, which again are super necessary to make the deck work, for the cost of a single Ghostly Prison a month ago. So because Ghostly Prison is cheap now, we can actually build a real Enchantress deck for Modern. So that's why I put these first. We'll go through the actual deck and kind of break it down. These will pop up again, but I wanted to mention that the cheapness, the newfound cheapness of Ghostly Prison is why we can actually build this deck. So the deck, the basic idea is it's kind of like Legacy Enchantress, of course watered down a bit because it's Modern, but we want to make some fast mana, make a bunch of mana, draw a bunch of cards, and eventually just overwhelm our opponent with enchantments. So to make mana, we have Arbor Elf plus Utopia Sprawl plus Fertile Ground. So all of these cards are +1 mana on their own. Arbor Elf untaps a forest, Utopia Sprawl and Fertile Ground enchant a land or a forest in Utopia Sprawl's case, and let that land tap for additional mana. Where it gets really crazy is when we have both of them. So if we can turn 1 Arbor Elf, turn 2 Utopia Sprawl, we can immediately tap and untap the Enchanted Forest with Utopia Sprawl and have access to 4 additional mana on turn 2, and then we're casting some of our big powerful spells way quicker than we should be, and that just kind of spirals out of control. So fast mana is step 1 to the deck. Step 2 is we draw a bunch of cards. So Arbor Elf is the only non-enchantment card in the entire main deck. Every single card is an enchantment, even the other creatures are enchantments. So Eidolon of Blossoms is our Enchantress. When it enters the battlefield, or when another enchantment enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. So we can play this as soon as turn 2 with the combo we were just talking about. And then we cast our Utopia Sprawls, our Fertile Grounds, all our other enchantments, and not only are they doing something, but they come with this draw card kicker attached to them, and things can spiral out of control super fast if our opponent can't kill our Eidolon. Courser isn't as obvious. It doesn't literally say draw a card, but it's super important to the deck. It gains us a bit of life, which is pretty key to keeping us alive, why we can lock creatures out of the game pretty well. Burn spells, especially backed up by some early creature damage before we get our Ghostly Prisons and so forth, can be an issue, but if we have a Courser out, we're just constantly gaining life, plus the ability to play the land off the top of our deck is almost drawing a card in some situations, because we get a useless land out of the way, which hopefully gets us to more enchantments for our draw step. So even though it's not literally drawing a card, it's still a form of card advantage that we can use to keep fueling our Eidolons and finding more enchantments. Of course, Courser is an enchantment creature as well, so it triggers Eidolon. It's an enchantment for Sphere of Safety to power that up. And then, against aggressive decks, we have quite a few options. We talked about Ghostly Prison and Sphere of Safety. These are the most important cards in the deck. We want to get a Ghostly Prison on turn 2 or turn 3, and then on turn 3, turn 4, get down a Sphere of Safety, and all of a sudden, our opponent's creatures just can't attack us. Ghostly Prison by itself is awesome in the early game. Paying 2 for an attacker means our opponent's in this position where either they skip their entire turn to attack with a Goblin Guide or some other early game creature, or they decide not to attack so they can keep developing their board. They stack well with 2 Ghostly Prisons. It costs 4 mana for 1 creature. So we want these in the early game, and then eventually we're going to draw into Sphere of Safety, which makes it cost amount of mana equal to the number of enchantments we control to attack. So it's not uncommon for it to cost 10, 15. I think in one game we had double Sphere of Safety, and it was 30 some mana for our opponent to attack with a single creature. So basically, over the course of time, we just lock creatures out of dealing combat damage altogether. Nyx Fleece Ram and Blind Obedience slow down our opponent's deck in different ways. The main thing here is the life gain. So Nyx Fleece Ram just gains us a life every turn. Blind Obedience in the late game, when we got tons of mana, we're drawing all these cards, we can just repeatedly use the Extort ability to keep gaining a life and draining our opponent for one. Can even win us a game over the long run if we extort enough times. But basically, they're kind of roadblocks. They slow down our opponent's early game assault and keep gaining us life. And then for more spell-based decks, we have Ivory Mask, which is basically budget Leyline of Sanctity. It is almost exactly Leyline of Sanctity, except it isn't a Leyline, so we can't start with it on the battlefield, which is annoying. It's not as good as Leyline, obviously. We can't just put it down for free to fizzle a turn 1 Thoughtseize, for example. But we have enough ramp that we can usually play it on turn 3, definitely by turn 4, and then we're still locking burn spells, late game discard, Liliana Ultimates, things like that out of the game. Story Circle is really cool. It can prevent damage from a source of a color that we choose when it enters the battlefield. So this helps against creatures. Against Merfolk, we can name blue. We can pay a white to prevent a damage from a Merfolk. It doesn't target a source, so it can stop hexproof creatures, boggles that are loaded up with enchantments. Also, sources include spells, so we can name red and target Lightning Bolt, Boros, Charm, so it helps kind of on both ends. And then Dovescape not only protects our enchantments by countering non-creature spells, and the most common way our opponent's going to be able to kill our Ghostly Prisons, for example, is Abrupt Decays, or other enchantment removal spells, a Maelstrom Pulse. Dovescape blocks that out, and it's also a backup win condition, because we have a lot of non-creature spells that are fairly expensive, so in theory, we can just outdove our opponent and make a ton of bird tokens and attack with all those birds for the win. And then we have a Porphyry Nodes, which is a way to deal with creatures. And again, this doesn't target, so it gets boggles, it gets hexproof creatures, it gets pretty much anything. The downside is it can also hit our creatures, and we're forced to choose. So if our creatures have the lowest power, there's some issues there. But if we don't have any creatures on board, we can usually manipulate things into a position where we're just destroying one of our opponent's creatures every single turn, or making our opponent stop playing creatures while they wait for the nodes to die when there's no creatures on the battlefield. And then for actually winning the game, we got 3 different options. Luminarch Ascension, a bit slow, but it's also cheap. So it's 2 mana, triggers all of our enchantment effects, pumps up Sphere of Safety, draws us cards, and over the course of turns, when we're not dealt damage, it gets counters. Once we get 4 counters on it, we can make a 4/4 Angel for just 2 mana. So this also plays off the fact that we have Sphere of Safety, Ghostly Prison, Ivory Mask, these ways to kind of lock our opponent out of the game. So if you can't attack with creatures, you can't target us with burn spells, it's going to be really hard for our opponent to deal damage to us. So it just slowly ticks up, and then we take over the game with Angels. Sigil kind of does the same thing. It's more expensive, so it's not as good with Sphere of Safety, not as good with Eidolon, because it costs a lot of mana to cast, but once it's on the battlefield, not only will every enchantment draw us a card with Eidolon, but it's going to come with a 4/4 Angel too, which lets us close out the game really fast. And then finally, we have Starfield of Nyx. A little risky because it animates all of our enchantments as long as we have 5 enchantments, turns them into creatures with power and toughness equal to their converted mana cost. It's sweet with, for example, Eidolon of Blossoms becomes a 4/4, much better than a 2/2 Dodges Lightning Bolt. On the other hand, it makes our Sphere of Safeties and Ghostly Prisons susceptible to Path to Exile and other creature removal spells. But it's very good in a lot of matchups, and being able to reanimate an enchantment every turn is also very good. Gets back things that were countered, things that our opponent may have killed with an Abrupt Decay or Maelstrom Pulse, things like that. So that's how we actually close out the game. As far as the mana base, it's a little janky. We have way too many Evolving Wilds effects. The problem is we really need Forest because Arbor Elf cares about Forest, Utopia Sprawl can only enchant a Forest. So we need to make sure that we can get a forest early in the game for those cards, or else our deck just really doesn't function the way we want it to. But then we also need to make sure that we have enough planes to be able to cast our double white mid-game, late-game spells. So that's why we're playing all the Evolving Wilds effects. Not ideal, but it gets by on a budget. Then as far as actual duels, we got Canopy Vista, which is in the deck because it is a forest, so it's very good for that reason. As far as the sideboard, Nyx Fleece Ram and Sphere of Safety for creature-based aggressive decks, Story Circle and Ivory Mask more for spell-based, combo-y aggressive decks to lock out burn spells and so forth. Then we have Rule of Law, which is specifically for like the Thing Ascension deck, Storm decks, decks that are looking to go off by casting a ton of spells in the same turn. And then last but not least, some protection. So Nevermore can come down and name an enchantment removal spell. It can name Echoing Truth that could bounce all of our Ghostly Prisons. Things like that. Can also just name whatever our opponent's best threat is if we're worried about a Nahiri coming down and exiling all of our enchantments or ticking up into an Emrakul. Nevermore is a really good answer to that. And then Open the Vault is in case our opponent has a way to deal with our enchantments or just has a ton of counter spells so they're countering our stuff. We can just mass reanimate all of our enchantments in one shot with one card, so it's kind of protection against that. So that is Enchantress for Modern, and this deck is super fun to play. It is just really, really fun. If you like the Legacy Enchantress deck we played at Mucha Brew, you're going to love this. It's a cheap, modern version of it. It's pretty powerful. Of course, I mean, there's problems. If our opponent can kill our stuff, get rid of all of our ramp, we can be kind of slow. But when it goes off and we get good draws, it is really good. And the neat thing is, the format isn't really that prepared to deal with Ghostly Prisons and Sphere of Safeties and so forth. If you look at like Merfolk, for example, they're looking to use like Hurkyl's Recall to bounce Ensnaring Bridge and win that way. Well, we're not going with artifacts, we're going with enchantments. So while the format is extremely prepared to deal with artifacts, they're not all that prepared to deal with enchantments. So we can kind of dodge a lot of the most powerful sideboard hate in the format just by being enchantment based rather than artifact based. So I think the deck is really fun. It's really sweet. I had a ton of fun playing it. You just draw so many cards, make so much mana, do a lot of cool things, and of course, you get to kind of lock your opponent out of the game sometimes. It's better in creature matchups. In creature matchups, this deck is super, super absurd. Like, I don't know how creature based aggro decks consistently beat this unless they have a really weird sideboard that is somehow built for enchantments. Otherwise, we're just so set up for those matchups because they can't get through Ghostly Prisons and Sphere of Safeties. And eventually, we're going to win with our Luminarch Ascensions, our Sigils, our Starfields. On the other hand, spell-based decks are a little harder, spell-based combo decks, but we can, in non-creature matchups, just take out our Ghostly Prisons, take out our Sphere of Safeties, and bring in Rules of Law, Story Circles, Nevermore, Ivory Mask, and kind of lock those decks out that way. So we do have a plan for those decks post-board, but game ones are probably a little rough. Anyway, that's been our deck tech for Modern Enchantress. I hope you enjoyed the gameplay videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you soon.